This is CNN Breaking News.
That breaking news.
I have to tell you, the pictures are shocking from London today.
Well, a very dramatic scene here outside of the Ecuadorian Embassy.
Because London police have arrested Wikileaks founder Julian Assange.
It has finally happened. Julian Assange was arrested within the Ecuadorian Embassy in London.
By British police at the Embassy of Ecuador.
Yes, Julian Assange was dragged out to the embassy.
The end of a 7-year standoff.
After an almost 7-year standoff holding international law enforcement at bay.
Mr. Assange was arrested this morning at about 10 o'clock at the Ecuadorian Embassy.
The Metropolitan Police say they were invited into the embassy.
Invited the British police onto Ecuadorian soil.
And he was arrested by British police.
He's now thought to be en route to a central London police station.
In custody at a central London police station.
What do you expect to happen in the next 24 hours?
So what's going to happen now is he's being taken to a central London police station and the police say that he will be presented before Westminster Magistrates Court as soon as is possible.
Well, he will, of course, be held on remand, awaiting the hearing at the Westminster Magistrates Court about whether or not he should be charged with jumping bail back in 2012. They probably will charge him, and he'll probably get a minimal sentence, if that.
3 hours later, he's in a court being insulted by the judge, even though the only thing he said was not guilty, as being a narcissist.
How is the press reacting to this story about Julian Assange's arrest?
It's been heavily covered. There's been a lot of awe and some jealousy. Very, very great criticism. Some of it actually, I think, rather vicious criticism of Julian Assange.
Statement, the Prime Minister.
I am sure that the whole House will welcome the news this morning that the Metropolitan Police have arrested Julian Assange.
Theresa May comes from a long line of lackeys, a long, long line. Cameron before her and Blair before him. We've all seen what's happened.
Hello, I am from the British government with a fabulous announcement. No, I'm sorry, we still haven't sorted out this bleeding shit show. But we have finally managed to arrest our most wanted criminal. No, the other one, Wikileaks founder Julian Assange.
Coming back to the timing of Assange's exit from the forced exit, I should say, from the Ecuadorian embassy.
And you may be thinking, wait, I don't get it. Why is Assange only being arrested now?
It took place only a day after Wikileaks editor-in-chief, Christian Hrafson, claimed that an extensive spying operation was conducted against Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Wikileaks uncovered an extensive spying operation against Julian Assange within the Ecuadorian embassy.
Cameras recorded both video and audio of the meetings that the Australian held with his lawyers.
And that particular operation was actually designed to get Assange extradited. Do you think it has been planned for a long time?
Well, what we know is that this is the product of a long negotiation between the British government and the Ecuadorian authorities.
It looks like it has been in the planning for certainly a number of months. I mean, only a few months ago it emerged that the Ecuadorian intelligence agencies had a based camp near the embassy, but they said that was to protect Assange.
Because all people who went in and out of the embassy, from fashion designer Vivienne Westwood to Pamela Anderson and my good self, somehow we were clocked in and clocked out just for going to see him. Where were those leaks from?
Pamela Anderson was among those who used to go and see him, but last year his visits were strictly curtailed.
I have a feeling they probably spent more time clocking in Pamela Anderson than they did you, but I think that's not so much a news question as it is a different kind of question.
I think it's probably because of political expediency. There seem to be some deals going on between the USA and Ecuador's new president and the new government.
And to welcome the cooperation of the Ecuadorian government in bringing this matter to a resolution.
We'd like to thank all who aided us in this operation, especially the Ecuadorian government.
Hola, I'm from the Ecuadorian government, and I'm here to confirm that our new president is America's bitch too.
Its president has become very pro-US, needs American money and American loans, and Mr. Pence, the Vice President, has travelled there and offered that money, one suspects, in return for Julian Assange.
They bribed him with a promise of a 4.7 billion IMF loan.
That's why he agreed to cancel Harry Hacker's political asylum and let pigs enter our embassy to arrest him.
They sold an Australian citizen for money. This is an outrage.
The country should be absolutely condemned for rescinding political asylum. This is not something that's given lightly. This is given due weight under international law.
He was granted asylum inside the Ecuadorian Embassy because of his concern about this risk of onward extradition to the United States.
They have, under the current political leadership in Ecuador, they have become increasingly frustrated by the situation, Mr. Assange being kept in their embassy in London for so long.
And he has now been handed over in breach of international and asylum law.
He only sought asylum inside the Ecuadorian Embassy when Sweden refused to give assurances about onward extradition to the United States. That was what he was concerned about.
The man who was promised asylum and was there for almost 7 years has simply been delivered into the hands of the police without being given an opportunity to go elsewhere.
But apparently Ecuador has discovered that hackers make terrible house guests.
Por 6 años y 10 meses, el pueblo ecuatoriano ha garantizado los derechos humanos del señor Assange y ha cubierto sus necesidades cotidianas en las instalaciones de nuestra embajada en Londres.
They felt that Mr. Assange had breached his asylum conditions. There are lots, if you claim asylum, there are lots of rules what you can and cannot do. You cannot, for example, engage in political activity and things like that.
He had new conditions imposed on his stay, including that he avoid online political activity and that he properly looked after his cat.
A pesar de que se le solicitó en varias ocasiones que respete y cumpla dichas normas, violó particularmente la norma de no intervenir en asuntos internos de otros estados.
There's no asylum agreement in the world that could ever be agreed to under law that limits one's speech, okay? Not in the European Union and not in the United States for sure.
Julian Assange went as far as taking the Ecuadorian government to court over the new rules and lost.
El señor Assange demandó en 3 instancias distintas el protocolo de convivencia. El señor Assange violó reiteradamente disposiciones expresas de las convenciones sobre asilo diplomático de La Habana. Sobre el comportamiento del señor Assange, la paciencia del Ecuador ha llegado a su límite.
A lot of allegations and rumours over the relationship breakdown, including that he spread feces on the walls. I mean, what has it been like for him living in there?
I think the first thing to say is that Ecuador has been making some pretty outrageous allegations over the past few days to justify what was an unlawful and extraordinary act.
Instaló equipos electrónicos de distorsión no permitidos, bloqueó las cámaras de seguridad de la misión del Ecuador en Londres, agredido y maltratado a guardias de la sede diplomática.
He was allegedly kicked out of the Ecuadorian embassy because he was defecating everywhere and creating messes.
No, that's a smear campaign. That's not true.
There was video of.
It's not true then.
That's not true.
La más reciente alerta en ese sentido se dio en enero del 2019, cuando Wikileaks filtró documentos del Vaticano.
So it became politically embarrassing to carry on granting asylum to Julian Assange and to rescind it, particularly in the wake of the exposure that there really is a secret grand jury indictment awaiting him in America, and there's a good chance the British will hand him over to America to face God knows what. I think is craven, pusillanimous and very dishonourable as well on the part of the Ecuadorian embassy.
He still has some fervent support, but the patience of his hosts has come to an end, and with it, his long, long stay in Knightsbridge.
I've just been with Mr. Assange in the police cells. He wants to thank all of his supporters for their ongoing support, and he said, "I told you so."
Jeffrey, it is so fascinating to watch how this chapter has ended for the moment.
But the important part of the story isn't how he was arrested, it's why he was arrested.
Why today, and what is Julian Assange charged with, or do we not know that?
The expected charges are espionage.
Well, we don't know yet what the charges that the United States has under seal.
Charges is he likely to face in a British court? Because we had a statement from the Home Secretary saying he's now in police custody and rightly facing justice in the UK.
The charges that he'll face in the UK are for breaching bail.
He has also been arrested in relation to an extradition request from the United States authorities. This is now a legal matter before the courts.
And his case is causing some political waves as well, with the Home Secretary likely to be involved in deciding where he ends up.
Adding, and I quote, "No one is above the law.
This goes to show that in the United Kingdom, no one is above the law.
Why should he be above the law?
He's not above the law, and the fact is Julian has never been concerned about facing British justice or indeed Swedish justice. This case is and has always been about his concern about being sent to face American injustice.
Remember back in November, prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia, in Alexandria, Virginia, accidentally posted a document that revealed that there were existing charges against Julian Assange.
Speculation is that there has been a secret grand jury convened in Virginia for years now.
A secret grand jury investigation for about 8 years where neither he nor anyone else was allowed to know the charges. This is completely against the principle of transparent and open judicial process.
The problem is, of course, that once he's in custody, it's very easy for the Americans to suddenly activate this not-so-secret grand jury, secret indictment, and then ask for extradition to America to stand trial, potentially under espionage charges.
Now, if anybody actually reads beyond the headline of the Department of Justice press release, which is about hacking, if you look at the actual factual allegations, what it boils down to is an allegation that he was communicating with a source, encouraging a source to provide information, and allegedly provided information to assist the source to protect their identity. So
this dates back to the original allegations when there were extradition hearings. The United States wanted Mr. Assange extradited to the United States where he could face questioning for the release of all that information.
But just so it's clear, whatever his sins, Assange did not steal documents from the United States government. He did not hack the DNC servers. He didn't break into John Podesta's Gmail account.
It has nothing to do with computer hacking. Julian Assange has never hacked any computer in the United States.
Assange has never been charged with any of that and wasn't today, no matter what they tell you.
there's no suggestion that Julian Assange hacked US government computers. There's no suggestion that he assisted Chelsea Manning to access material that Chelsea Manning didn't already have access to. It is simply an allegation of an intention to assist a source to protect their identity while accessing that material. This is something that journalists do all the time.
Hello, I'm from the US government. We're grateful to all our bitches for handing over David Letterman, Julian Assange, who is wanted on charges of making us look like war criminals, which of course we are.
This is about Chelsea Manning's leak in 2010. This is about US spying on UN and European politicians. This is about human rights abuse and corruption the world over. This is about evidence of US war crimes, killing journalists. These are the publications that he is now facing extradition and prosecution over.
For the crime of helping his source to anonymously access documents in the public interest, otherwise known as good journalism.
Many people aren't happy about him getting arrested because they worry this could open the door to journalists getting arrested for leaking government secrets.
The argument seems to be that this is a journalist concerned with transparency, that it was a public interest defence.
A lot of people are concerned that by arresting Assange, the government is creating a precedent to lock up journalists who expose government secrets in the future.
What kind of message does this send to journalists, not only in the United States, but throughout the world?
This is a very bad precedent for journalism and news media, period.
This is a dark day for journalism.
It certainly sets a precedent here and a very bad example.
This sets a dangerous precedent for all media organisations and journalists in Europe and elsewhere around the world.
So this is a case that sets a precedent for the rest of the media and how other journalists will be treated if they reveal classified information.
This precedent means that any journalist can be extradited for prosecution in the United States for having published truthful information about the United States.
This is one of the darkest days of journalism in my lifetime, and I'm going to remember this day for the rest of my life.
Yesterday is a day that will live in the history of journalism, of law in this country, and of civil liberties in this country, because it was a direct attack on the First Amendment.
This is a crushing move against a profession that has already been crushed so much over the last few years.
Well, I suppose it makes sense that if you're going to call comedians foreign agents, then you might as well call journalists and publishers criminals.
Well, I think it's a dark day, not just for journalism, but for everyone else, for the entire world, really.
It's a warning from history. It's a stop warning.
It was indeed a very stark and nightmarish image of seeing Julian taken out of the front door of the embassy with the Rupley camera there. This is what we call here in the U.S. a perp walk. They wanted us to see him.
To watch that, colloquial perp walk, he's actually a perp carry.
To see them physically carrying him out, special branch, I suppose, and putting him in that van and driving him away was absolutely chilling.
Anybody watching that shocking image of Julian being forced out of the embassy by half a dozen police and pushed into a van will know that if that can happen to somebody for using journalism to let us know the truth, that can happen to anybody.
To see someone who is a journalist, who has published true information, not fake news, being bundled into a police car and effectively bundled on the way to the United States of America, exercising extraterritorial jurisdiction in another country, is so deeply shocking, I think, to anyone who has any sense of media freedom.
This is just misrule of law in operation. It is absolute shock.
Well, the Assange arrest is scandalous in several respects. One of them is just the effort of governments, and it's not just the U.S. government. The British are cooperating. Ecuador, of course, is now cooperating. Sweden before had cooperated. The efforts to silence a journalist who was producing materials that people in power didn't want the rascal multitude to know about.
Literally is the use of American law to further American policy, including American security policy, in this case by means of an extradition treaty, but with an ally which will inevitably, unfortunately, comply with it.
To think that the UK has become such a willing accomplice and satellite of the American empire that it would do such a thing in contravention of all laws is absolutely stunningly appalling and makes me ashamed to be an Englishman.
That's like a whole level of a direct assault on on journalism.
You know, there is an actual word that's used, and most guys who are journalists like yourself and myself know it. It's called the chilling effect. A chilling effect is something that you can do to reporters, not so much to punish them for doing something, but from sending a message so that they won't do their jobs in the future.
This is the ultimate chilling effect. And it was done in broad daylight. They didn't hide it. They're actually quite proud of marching into a sovereign territory of another country and breaking of international law and of an asylum agreement.
It's a brutish treatment of anyone who will stand up to the establishment.
What they're trying to do, Trump and the rest of them, and Theresa May, is they're trying to frighten would-be Julian Assanges, who may provide this incredibly important service for the rest of us in society in the future. They're trying to scare them off so they won't do it. They're trying to make an example of Julian Assange.
Because look what they did to Julian Assange. We can do it to you. That's the message they're sending.
Absolutely. That's authoritarianism right there, what we saw coming when we saw Julian Assange dragged out of that embassy and the public being shut out because the corporate media, again, does not inform and takes the wrong side. They take the side of the state, not the side of the people. And it's the governed they're supposed to serve, not the governors.
It is a chilling effect. That just make sure that no one ever does it. No one challenges the empire and its narrative.
Who is the next?
That this is exactly what the purpose is. It is to, people don't want to discuss the things that Julian Assange and Wikileaks have exposed, the war crimes in Iraq, the rigging of the democratic primary process. All of those things are no longer being talked about. What we're being talked about are all these other things, which are basically an attempt to discredit Assange, discredit Wikileaks.
This is journalism on trial. It's not Julian Assange. This is the right of the public to know what their rulers are doing in their name.
This is going to send a very ominous message to
publications like the New York Times and others that you better not try this.
By extraditing a foreign journalist, we hope to send a clear warning to all journalists not to mess with our shit.
If they in any way produce and publish for consumption by the public anything that, in any way exposes what these secret governments are doing, then they're liable to be extradited. They can fabricate charges and say we need to extradite this person. This is a very bad precedent, says now any country in the world can do this.
I really fear that it could drop a kind of iron curtain between the public and the inner workings of power.
So the whole objective is to get the entire worldwide media to obey the orders of the shadow government.
So as it stands, Julian Assange is in custody in Britain, and everyone's waiting to see if he'll get extradited to the U.S.
It's widely expected he will be extradited to the United States to stand trial.
This case is and has always been about the risk of extradition to the United States.
The U.S. government wants to extradite him for the crime of revealing our crimes.
En la línea de nuestro compromiso respetuoso de los derechos humanos y el derecho internacional, solicité a Gran Bretaña la garantía de que el señor Assange no sería entregado en extradición a un país en el que pueda sufrir torturas o pena de muerte.
His concern was that he did not want to be extradited to the United States, as you mentioned. Could that now happen?
It's possible.
Once we're done, we'll extradite his skippy ass off to Virginia to face a grand jury, because we're America's bitch.
It depends entirely what the Americans say and do. It depends, first of all, what happens through the British judicial process. And then once that has happened, then the question remains, what action do the Americans want to take? Do they want to push ahead with extradition?
There was a grand jury investigation that was opened back in 2010, and we were concerned about the risk of US extradition then. That concern has been proven correct this week.
We know from the moment that he left the Ecuadorian Embassy in London that his original claim made 7 years ago that he was trying to escape extradition to the United States was true, even though all his enemies denied this.
Since 2010, we've warned that Julian Assange would face prosecution and extradition to the United States for his publishing activities with Wikileaks. Unfortunately, today we've been proven right.
The extradition demand was produced immediately he was released from Ecuadorian asylum.
We've today received a warrant and a provisional extradition request from the United States.
We warned for years, and that is precisely what has happened. He was right all along, and we were right all along to be worried about it.
It suggests that the US administration really does have a vendetta against him.
Now, of course, legally, this is difficult because America does have the death penalty. Britain is not supposed, under European law, to extradite people to countries that do have the death penalty. But it has exhibited a massive lack of backbone in extraditions of British subjects to America over the last decade.
And we should also remember that there is no grand jury for Julian Assange for the DNC hack or leak or whatever it was. It only relates to the revelation of internal CIA documents.
On top of everything else, in order to prove that conspiracy, they have to, it seems, rely heavily on the testimony of Chelsea Manning.
Yes.
Chelsea Manning has been rearrested and has been held in solitary confinement, is still being held in prison because she is refusing to testify against WikiLeaks and testify against Assange.
Who is not actually providing testimony and is being kept in indefinite detention until she does, which I would have thought is also a very troubling thing. And since when in the West have we been keeping people in indefinite detention until they testify against someone else?
Because the reality is detention and extradition without charge has become a feature of the European Union.
I mean, we are slowly slipping, it seems to me, into Moscow trials territory. Smears against the accused and pressure on other people to get them to testify. Yeah. Very bad in every way.
The British people need to stop their government from allowing this to happen.
The UK government needs to make a full assurance that a journalist will never be extradited to the United States for publishing activity.
We know that we are under the thumb. Well, we, the British people, need to get out from under the thumb and say, no.
We've got to take the Julian Assange as the central figure out of the equation, and let's just talk about sovereignty.
Julian Assange is not an American citizen. He's an Australian citizen. And at one point, before Lenin Moreno revoked his citizenship, he was an Ecuadorian citizen.
He has nothing to do with the United States. He's an Australian citizen living in London and operating in London.
Julian Assange is an Australian citizen, and his own government didn't lift a finger. No surprise there. WikiLeaks is an operation that is not based in the United States.
It wasn't in the United States when they happened. They didn't come from Julian Assange. So what exactly are you going to extradite Julian Assange, a citizen of Australia, to the United States for? How do you commit a crime in a country you weren't in?
The Department of Justice now is making a claim that its reach is global.
So in this case, why is it acceptable for the United States to have the power to even begin to give even a proposal to extradite somebody whose crime is to expose to the public materials that people in power don't want them to see?
And if he can then face extradition, face potential espionage charges in a country of which he is not a citizen, of which he is not a resident as well, then that calls into question the role of all other media too.
If the Department of Justice determines that you have committed some kind of crime, espionage, for example, against the United States, you can be prosecuted anywhere in the world.
And so the legal precedent that this sets is number one, that anyone who publishes classified material it can be subject to the Espionage Act, as recent editorials in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post correctly pointed out.
It's patently absurd. It's about the principle of law, the principle of sovereignty. It should be on the premise of facts.
This is a hostile prosecution. It is not based on facts that we know.
Secondly, that any journalist anywhere in the world that in the eyes of the United States violates security can be seized and carted back to the United States for trial.
So I think he does face a very, very grave threat of being taken over to America. And I'm sure they'll say, of course, we won't apply any death penalty, but he does face a long prison sentence.
And as we know from the way that the American government uses international criminal justice to further its foreign policy ends, but of course never allows international tribunals like the International Criminal Court, indeed forbids them to have any say over America. We can see that this extraterritoriality is a one-way street.
Yep.
It is the American empire.
The United States has filed new charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
Justice Department's unprecedented decision to indict WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange on 17 charges of espionage.
17 counts of violating the Espionage Act.
Publishing U.S. military and diplomatic documents exposing U.S. war crimes.
He's facing Aunt Becky levels of prison time.
Faces up to 170 years in prison.
The U.S. Justice Department's new indictment says that Julian Assange directed former Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to illegally obtain classified information.
Or any other grand jury.
The charges under the Espionage Act are just frankly legally bizarre.
Assange supporters call the charges a threat to press freedom.
And press freedom groups, journalists, whistleblowers have condemned this escalation.
The decision by the U.S. Justice Department to slap Julian Assange with 17 new charges is raising the alarm of media freedom groups.
But that's why US free speech groups have been up in arms this week and are very concerned about the chilling impact this will have.
Any government use of the Espionage Act to criminalise the receipt and publication of classified information poses a dire threat to journalists seeking to publish such information in the public interest.
Because this indictment clearly engages news gathering activities and the kinds of communications that journalists have with sources all the time.
This is an extraordinary escalation of the Trump administration's attacks on journalism and a direct assault on the First Amendment.
And the indictment against Wikileaks founder Julian Assange has alarmed journalists at newspapers around the world, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Guardian.
The espionage indictment of Assange for publishing is an extremely dangerous frontal attack on the free press. Bad, bad, bad.
The Department of Justice just declared war, not on Wikileaks, but on journalism itself. This is no longer about Julian Assange. This case will decide the future of media.
This is madness. It is the end of national security journalism and the First Amendment.
Because, as the editor of the Washington Post has put it, quote, criminalizes common practices in journalism that have long served the public interest.
Anyone who believes in public interest journalism and understands the public interest in the publications that WikiLeaks made, like I said, spying on UN leaders, spying on European politicians, spying on the French president.
It's called freedom of information, and it is absolutely central to the working of any healthy form of government, including democracies.
Newspapers like The Guardian, The Washington Post, The New York Times, and many, many other major outlets around the world have, one, been using the information that WikiLeaks has produced, and two, have then set up rival leaks-type submission procedures in order to try and do the same sort of work.
I have to wonder if the Guardian, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, are they going to be held accountable? Are they going to face espionage charges because they disseminated so much of what WikiLeaks released to the public, and they profited from it?
The way the law is structured right now, the New York Times could be prosecuted for publishing.
I don't care about those
Assange
pinheads,
got.
and I'm not
You
calling
could be
for
prosecuted.
That. I can't be prosecuted
Did
for
Fox
anything.
News? Fox News distributed the Assange leaks.
Here we see what I talked about a week or two ago, the use of the criminal law to suppress information, and this is what we call dictatorship.
The criminal prosecution of telling the truth on behalf of the powerful, prosecuting those who were telling the truth to the powerless. It's really as simple as that. Julian Assange did nothing wrong, told no lies, unlike most of the political class on both sides of the Atlantic, told us things we needed to know, deserved to know, had a right to know, and the powerful want to punish him for it.
I suspect they're fabricating evidence just to get him extradited to the U.S., at which time they'll add many more charges, most of which will be based on what they'll call national security information, so it'll all be classified and hidden from public view.
The impending trial of Julian Assange could be all behind closed doors, could be all secret.
Are you saying that Julian Assange can be brought to the United States and be put on trial in secret?
Yes, exactly. I mean, they've done that before.
It's national security. You can't explain what evidence was being used.
They'll go behind closed doors with the judge, present the evidence, and no one from the defense is allowed to see it. And so therefore they'll be convicted in closed session.
By the same judge as every single other national security defendant in recent years. This is not going to be a fair trial. You know that.
And I have to say this began under the Obama administration with the misuse of the Espionage Act. It wasn't designed to shut down whistleblowers. Obama used it 9 times against, for instance, Edward Snowden and others, and that had a huge chilling effect.
I mean, WikiLeaks came into being, it filled a niche that was absolutely necessary, is to hold power to account. And that is his greatest crime, is holding power to account, because that's exactly what journalists were supposed to do. That's what the Fourth Estate was supposed to do.
The Fourth Estate is dead. I used to speak of the Fourth Estate as being moribund. Now it's dead.
The U.S. Constitution is being torn up by the Trump administration. That's why Julian basically is in the trouble he is.
Law in the United States, after the Patriot Act and 1022 and 1021, the amendments to it, citizens barely have rights anymore. Everything is at the whim of the Commander-in-Chief.
No more regard to the Magna Carta or the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. There is no press freedom.
There is no law. There is no recourse to the law.
We don't even follow habeas corpus. That's the whole basis of our Western civilization and rule of law.
It's when the law goes that we find ourselves pitched into world wars.
What would you say about the Pentagon Papers? What would you say about the guy who did that?
There hasn't actually been such a significant attack on the freedom of the press, the First Amendment, which is the bedrock of our republic, really, our form of government, since my case in 1971, 48 years ago.
Terrorist.
He's a terrorist.
Washington Post was a terrorist organization for publishing those Nixon stories.
In 1971, the Washington Post and the New York Times published a trove of stolen classified documents about the Vietnam War. It was called the Pentagon Papers. Remember that?
This is basically Pentagon Papers 2.0.
Liberals loved it. Books were written celebrating their bravery.
This is much, much bigger because its impact is immense.
As recently as 2011, the Washington Post saw the connection. Quote, a conviction of Julian Assange would also cause collateral damage to American media freedoms, a Post op-ed said that year. Quote, it is difficult to distinguish Assange or WikiLeaks from the Washington Post. And that's true.
The difference is, back in 1971, journalists uniformly stood beside Ellsberg, okay? Yeah. And in this case, they're uniformly against Assange.
Bernstein and Woodward, those guys are terrorists. We should get lead poison those guys, shoot them right in the head.
I mean, I can't believe what is going on.
A new front in President Trump's war on the free press, which he regards as the enemy of the people.
I don't think that people really knew that Trump would take these powers and become so authoritarian with them.
Because when Trump was actually campaigning to be elected as president, of course he was very complimentary about the role that WikiLeaks played in trying to expose the deep state and corruption in America and other countries.
Because I thought that he would be a guy that would want Julian Assange out.
Talking out of both sides of his mouth. He said how many times during the campaign trail, WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks.
I'm quite disappointed, again, by President Trump, because he used to say that he likes WikiLeaks because it helped against the Clinton gang.
Hillary beat Bernie, although it looks like Bernie got a little bit of a bad deal based on WikiLeaks, right? They want to distract us from WikiLeaks. It's been amazing what's coming out on WikiLeaks. This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. Another one came in today. This WikiLeaks is like a treasure trove. Getting off the plane, they were just announcing new WikiLeaks. Well, I love reading those WikiLeaks.
It was really quite amazing. Went from I love WikiLeaks to I know nothing about WikiLeaks.
I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing.
It was a very cowardice moment.
Disappointed.
However, of course, since then, we've seen Trump as a president be corralled and controlled by the intelligence agencies largely and by the bogus Russiagate investigation, which came to nothing. And they've sort of backed him into a corner where he will apparently do what he's told now by the establishment in America.
Assange, is Trump playing it both ways?
Trump is rolling over to the intelligence community, and he's getting steamrolled by the military-industrial complex. I mean, that's where a lot of this started, right? So the intelligence community did not like Trump's rhetoric that he was going to end our foreign wars. So that's another thing that this all comes down to, that people don't realize. You are not allowed to go against the permanent state in America. And what is that? That's our intelligence communities. That's the NSA, that's the CIA, that's the FBI. Those guys work at the FBI and NSA and CIA for 30 years. A president comes and goes in 4 years or 8 years. So they're the permanent state.
But then you look back before the campaign, and he said Julian Assange should get the death penalty on Fox and Friends back in the day.
When he was talking to Brian Kilmeade, co-host of Fox and Friends in the morning, he's got a radio show, Donald Trump appearing on his radio show, and was asked about Julian Assange.
Claim it'll be on. He's going to talk about WikiLeaks. You had nothing to do with the leaking of those documents. It's disgraceful. You had nothing to do with the leaking of those documents. It's disgraceful. You do think it's disgraceful? Yeah, this should be like death penalty or something. Yeah, this should be like death penalty or something.
Whoa! Whoa! Not only disgraceful, there should be a death penalty or something.
So I think any hopes that Assange might have that Trump might back off and might let him go and just face the judicial process in Britain for jumping bail, which is no big deal. He'd face 6 months in prison. I think It's unlikely that Trump now will be allowed to make an independent decision. One hopes that he would. I mean, he does show streaks of independence to this day, but the deep state has been incredibly able, incredibly careful in backing him into that corner and making sure that he plays ball with what the American agenda is.